Chapter 7, Day 2, Sphere 1, Ausar. The Self, our true identity versus the persona, our false identity. Within man are two distinct intelligences at work. One, which is hidden in the unconscious, is in charge of directing and coordinating the physiological and psychological functions that are the support of our lives. To accomplish these tasks, the intelligence of this spirit part of being has to be on par with that of the Supreme Being. In fact, it is the manifestation of the Supreme Being within us. This indwelling intelligence is Ausar, our self, our true identity, classified at the first sphere. In other words, we must identify ourselves with the capacity to accomplish what this part of being performs daily in the subconscious realms of our being. TOLM is an effective technique to enable this part of being to externalize its divine wisdom and power and make it available to the personal and social arenas of our lives. It need not be restricted to the so-called involuntary support functions of the body and the mind. The other intelligence is the familiar consciousness that we use in the waking and dream state. This intelligence has the task of directing and coordinating the personal and social arenas of our lives. As we know too well, it is limited in its intellectual capacities, more often than not replete with a host of incorrect and injurious information and vulnerable to the control of wayward passions. This is our person, classified at the 9th sphere of the tree. It is what most people take as their identity. In comparing the two intelligences, we can immediately understand a major cause of the problems we are having in our lives and in the world, as well as how to solve them. Let the all-knowing and all-capable indwelling intelligence guide the ignorant and limited outer intelligence in the affairs of our lives. The union of the two is the objective of yoga and religion. Both words carry the meaning of union. What we must primarily focus on concerning the work performed by the indwelling intelligence, Ausar, is the fact of how well coordinated and integrated, united, are the underlying support functions of the body and mind. Unity, therefore, is its hallmark, and the lack of it in the various dynamics operating in the affairs of our lives is the cause of all of our problems. On the other hand, the person, Sphere 9, the set of habitual thought, emotional, and action responses to given events that distinguish each one of us, is a veritable ocean of contradictory and conflicting ideals and emotional patterns of behavior. Disunity is the essence of the person. We have many mutually contradictory beliefs. Our emotions are often in conflict with our ideals. Our personal interests are often in conflict with those of others and the environment. The consequences are dire, as we well know. For example, a major cause of illness is the lack of integration in the emotional sphere. And since emotional manifestations affect physiological and biochemical functions, the disorganization of the emotions, inner conflicts, excesses, etc., results in illnesses. Ultimately, health can only be achieved by surrendering the direction of our lives to the unifying function of the indwelling intelligence, Ausar. The same applies to the affairs of our lives, given that success and social harmony are to the affairs of our lives what health is to the body and to the mind. It must be understood that the acknowledgement and surrendering of the lower outer intelligence, the person, to the indwelling divinity, the true self, is not to be viewed as a technicality in the science of spiritual development and meditation, but as an act of acknowledging God's presence within our being. It cannot be said too often that the majority of seekers, quote unquote, on the path of spiritual science fall into the trap of believing that deliverance will come primarily from the application of spiritual techniques, meditation, rituals, oracles, astrology, etc. No, these are only the means of preparing the spirit to receive and manifest the guidance of God. And with that, we must hold always in our awareness that there is in us, who we are, a living, conscious presence that is aware of all our thoughts, desires, and actions. Will you refrain from sinning in the presence of a teacher, wife, husband, yet do so in the presence of God? This truth is embodied in the hieroglyphic determinative for Ausar, and I. It symbolizes the fact that God, dwelling in everyone's spirit, is privy to all of our deeds, thoughts, and feelings. With this understanding, man's relationship to God is not to be framed around an act of believing or faith, but in the acknowledgement of its presence within and the identification with God as our true self. As it is said that man was made in the likeness of God. The ignorance of our being made in the likeness of God, that is, we have been given the same kinds of attributes and powers possessed by God, though not the same amount of power, is not evident to most people because the divine aspect of our being lies dormant in our unconscious. This fact was symbolized in the legend of Ausar, according to which he, quote unquote, was killed by Set, suppressed by the lower part of man's being, emotions and intellect, and drowned in the river Nile, symbol of the unconscious. We saw in the preceding chapter that the first requirement for the resurrection of the God dwelling in us is the establishment of hetep, inner peace. For the simple fact that the emotions and intellect represent the lower self, the person, and their dominance thus represents an identification with the person. Unity, peace among men, and prosperity. In the legend of Ausar and the various references to him in the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and stelae at Abydos, Ausar is portrayed as the chief bringer of civilization and prosperity to the Egyptians and to mankind. The technological accomplishments that are generally used by Western people to define civilization is not meant here. The reference is to the civil behavior that brings about unity and peace between men, which in turn creates prosperity. Before there can be unity between men, individuals must be taught to first bring about unity within themselves, between their various emotional drives, unity between their emotions and their beliefs and knowledge, and with the environment. This is not a feat that can be calculated by man's limited intellect. We must realize that the intelligence that unifies our physiological functions is not, as some people believe, a body intelligence, as it matches in knowledge the intelligence embodied in the creative process of the universe. As we will see, a major theme running through the initiation curriculum of Kamitic is the actuality of the transference of the unlimited intelligence and powers at work in man's unconscious to the limited intelligence of the conscious side of his mind and life. Or, to paraphrase from a different discipline, to assimilate the powers of, or to eat, the knowledge of the gods. In other words, all of the powers and intelligence exhibited by something, quote unquote, that directs our unconscious processes can be transferred to our consciousness and made available as skills for managing the affairs of our lives. This process, the rendering of the unconscious conscious, is what has been clumsily dubbed as magic, ESP, psi, supernatural, etc. We will see that it forms the entire basis, properly labeled and explained this time, of Kamitic spirituality. The hidden intelligence is neither of the body nor the unconscious, but of God dwelling in man's spirit. Ausar, the indwelling God, as the source of prosperity, was metaphorized as the source of the land's agricultural fecundity, and as the source of the inundation of the Nile, its overflowing fertilized land, which were the basis of Egypt's survival, wealth, and prosperity. Because Ausar represents the part of our being that is in charge of bringing about the unity of mankind and of man with the world, which was considered by the Egyptians as the essence of the good, the summum bonum, disunity being the essence of evil, the rituals and doctrines surrounding Ausar received the greatest focus amongst the various aspects of God throughout the entire history of Kamitic. The Assyrian Doctrine is the central theme of the oldest religious scripture in the world, the Pyramid Texts, 3500 BC. The supreme importance placed on the divine principle of unity by the Egyptians was taken over by the monotheistic religions, who mistook the concept of monotheism, or unity, a relational abstraction, for the concept of the one God, a concrete idea. This misunderstanding enabled them to wantonly destroy or condemn, exercising disunity, all who did not present or approach the same one God in the form that they did. We need not, of course, waste our time on discussions of the subject, as history clearly shows that the position was mainly one of religious imperialism, or imperialism using religion as a potent weapon. Urdu Ab. Urdu Ab, stillness of heart, Ab equals will, which symbolizes control over emotions and the lower intellect, was an epithet given to Ausar to emphasize the fact that unity, as well as the manifestation of wisdom and spiritual power, cannot be achieved unless one rises above the domination of the lower part of being. As long as one's behavior is determined by likes and dislikes, and the quest for pleasure and avoidance of pain, one will find oneself unable to embrace certain legitimate obligatory realities of the world. We can now see how the ability to become one with all people and the world depends on the realization of Hetep, the law of Amen, sphere 0. The imperative to oneness and monotheism. Although dormant within the spirit of man, the indwelling God makes its dormancy felt as a vacuum that manifests as the urge to oneness. Out of touch with the true self, the uninitiated uses his persona and its blood relations, community of interests and ideas, nationalism, etc., as a focus of unification. As none of these encompass the totality of man's being, unification takes place in narrow circles and readily breaks down in the face of seemingly conflicting interests. Only God dwelling in man's spirit can unify man with his/her environment and men with each other. This is the true understanding of monotheism, which addresses itself not to the theme of the existence of one God versus many, but to the unifying function of God. It is a dormant function that must be awakened, that it may accomplish its goal in the world as it does for the subconscious aspects of man's being. To summarize, God dwells in man's unconscious, symbolized by Ausar, Sphere 1, where it performs the function of unifying man's involuntary physiological functions and subconscious mental processes. The goal of man's life is to bring this function to the foreground of man's life, the resurrection of Ausar, that it may manage the affairs of his or her personal and social life. Or, as it has been said more poetically, to let the glory that is done in heaven be done on earth. Heaven is, of course, a symbol of the higher region of man's unconscious, hell, the lower, the id, and earth, a symbol of man's waking consciousness. We will see that this resurrection is begun through the functions of the faculty symbolized in Ausar, Sphere 9. We must battle to establish it through the use of the will, symbolized by Heru, Sphere 6. The resurrection is consummated in Ma'at, Sphere 4. Assignments. The night preceding day 2 of TOLM, Ausar Contemplative Meditation. Number 1. Review the material given in this chapter, as well as the preceding sections wherein Ausar was discussed. Additional data should be looked up through the index. Number 2. Go into trance using the instructions given in Chapter 5. You may also have a TOLM partner assist you with trance induction through Arisaong. 3. Once you are in trance, see signs of trance in Chapter 5. Recall to mind, i.e. contemplate, situations in which you violate the laws of the Ausar part of your spirit in regards to the area of your life, career, relationship, health, etc. you are currently working on rectifying. One of the ways in which we violate the indwelling God is by crediting the success of our efforts to our persons and devoting our lives to the glorification of our persons as opposed to the glorification of God. Another violation is in relying primarily on our person with its earthly faculties, intellect and imagination, for success in our careers, marriage, healing, etc. Identification with our persons, which deny our identification with the indwelling God as our true selves, also takes place in very subtle ways. These can be detected in our beliefs, self-images, and motives, etc. Write down these situations as detailed scenarios. Take note of when, where, and with whom, what is said and done in the situation. You will use this scenario in your work in the days ahead. If you are not able to maintain yourself in trance as you perform this introspection, continue with the deep breathing throughout the contemplation. 4. The following questions will also assist you in your introspection. Preliminary Ausar questions. Number 1. Do you believe that it is natural for people to react emotionally, become upset, experience joy, cry, laugh, etc., to some situations in life? Even in situations in which someone is about to be murdered, death of a loved one, loss or gain of millions of dollars, rape, and so on? Number 2. Do you believe that there are certain situations in which you would not be able to keep your person from reacting emotionally? See examples above. Number 3. Do you believe that there are things and/or situations that possess the quality of beauty that are frightening, disgusting, depressing, uplifting, and so on? Number 4. Do you identify in thought, feelings, or actions with any of the behavior patterns that define your personality, e.g., I am shy, I am a loner, I am proud, I like so-and-so, etc.? Number 5. Do you have preferences based on likes and dislikes? If you answered yes to any of these questions, do not proceed to the main Ausar questions. You have 0 points. Main Ausar questions. It is of utmost importance to note that the answers to these questions are to be sought in what your behavior shows and not what you say about the subject, i.e., the question concerns your ability to do and not just your knowledge of the subject. Number 1. Do you give respect to the presence of God in your spirit by refraining from wrongdoing and from indulging in any of the host of emotional behaviors, whether you are in the presence of others or alone? If your answer is yes, you have 164 points. If no, you have no points. Ausar assignment, day 2 of TOLM. From this day on, you must make the effort to observe the laws of Ausar in regards to the area of life you are now seeking to rectify, and to whatever area of insight, and to whatever area the insight spills over. As this is the very beginning of the process, and there are many other sets of violations, 9 more to be exact, do not be concerned over the fact that you may not be succeeding in your efforts. Of chief importance is giving respect to the presence of God in your spirit by resisting acting from emotional and sensual influences. Review your Untitled Chapter.